Hi everyone, Lyndon here from the Bavianes Canyon Trail. Today is the 26th of May, so 3 weeks since the floods hit the Bavianes Kloof. We will be hiking, we will be welcoming hikers back to the trail in 3 days, so on Friday. And this video is really just for hikers coming for the next 2 or 3 weeks as the water continues to subside, to give you an idea of where there will be water on the trail that you'll be actually walking through kloofs with ankle deep water, and where we would recommend you bringing dry shoes and wet shoes and how to utilize that. When we are talking about wet shoes, I'm not talking about thin-soled booties or wetsuit-looking shoes that require, that when you walk, they don't have a proper sole. So wet shoes in this context are your normal tackies or trail shoes that for the duration of these 5 days you will use when you are needing to walk in places where you're repeatedly going to get your feet wet. So let me share my screen and I'll talk you through each day very briefly, just so that we get a sense of what lies ahead for you. So on day one of the Canyon Trail, probably the easiest day to make decisions, in that you have got only a few places where you're crossing the river, and then you can keep walking again on the other side in dry conditions. So you'll see here we've got a spot just as you're leaving the interpretive center. There's another river crossing, a river crossing, and a river crossing. So on day one, you have 4 river crossings, fairly easy to navigate. You can just take your one pair of shoes, and at those river crossings, take off those shoes, walk barefoot or with flip-flops to the other side of the river, dry your feet, and put your dry shoes back on again. All right, when we head to day 2, the picture changes slightly. In this section, you are going to be walking the second half of the day, where it is strong likelihood that you'll be crossing the rivers multiple times, up to 10 to 15 times. On this section, my recommendation would be that you take 2 pairs of shoes, your dry shoes that you start the day with, and then a pair of wet shoes that you wear for the last 5 kilometers. So you'll see here at the very start of the trail, you're going to walk and get your feet wet. So just either do that barefoot or in flip-flops or in wet shoes. But then for this, in the mountain section, you've got a good probably 6 to 8 kilometers where you'll be up on the mountains and you can wear dry shoes. Once you drop into the valley, in particular these narrow sections here, you are repeatedly going to be crossing the river, sometimes every 50 meters, 60 meters. It'll be ankle deep. So at this point, you probably want to keep your wet shoes on, that you will then walk the rest of the day through to the campsite in those same wet shoes. All right, let's have a look at day 3. As many of you will know by now, day 3 is the day at Paradise Kloof. This is a day of slot canyons, narrow sections, and probably the day where, even though it's the shortest and the easiest, where you'll probably be in your wet shoes most of the time. So you leave Camp 2 at the bottom. You have a short walk. You will cross the first river at this point, and then another dry walk until you actually get to the entrance of Paradise Kloof. How you choose to do that section is entirely up to you. It's about 1.5 kilometers. From this point onwards, we recommend you get into your wet shoes, and then you keep the wet shoes on for the rest of the day until you come back to this point later in the day. On this day, there are 2 sections where you're going to need to actually get wet, properly wet, from more than just ankle or calf high. Your first slot canyon here at the gateway, you will probably be waist deep. And then your second section at the ladder, you will be fully swimming without your feet touching the ground for about 2 to 3 meters until you get to the ladder and walk on out. Now, the key to this day, in my advice, is to be prepared to have the bottom half of your body wet often, and then you can make sure the top half of your body is very warm. So have multiple layers on with warm jackets. As long as the top half of your body remains warm, you can handle having the bottom half and your shoes wet for the day, and you will still remain warm for the day. So that would be our advice for this day. All right, moving on to day 4 of the Canyon Trail. Let's just pop up that. Day 4 is going to be very similar to day 2 in that you will start the day with climbing up into the mountains. So coming out of Camp 3, you'll be going up into the mountains along this entire section. You might have one river crossing at the bottom of Must Come Up, and then down to the drop-off. So basically the first 10 kilometers of the day will be with dry shoes. From that point onwards, as you drop into the playground and through Duivenkloof, you will once again likely be crossing the river multiple times. So a recommendation for this section is that last 6 kilometers wear wet shoes again, changing them as you come in at the drop-off. Now that is very much the same scenario as what we would recommend for day 5. You'll see that day 5, you have to cross the river immediately out of camp, so within the first 10 meters. But after that, there is dry mountain walking for all the way up until probably around here. So a good 13, 14 kilometers will be dry mountain walking, and the last 3 or 4 kilometers, you'll be crossing the riverbed. At this point here, if you want to go into the orange room to have a look, that small section, it's 10 to 15 meters, will have a river flowing through it, likely, and you will need your shoes to get into that and then out again. All that being said, we are not sure how quickly the water will drop. As many of you know, if you've hiked the Leopard Trail, this is an area where the status of these rivers is normally dry for 2 or 3 years at a time, maybe running for 24 hours, 48 hours a year after a thunderstorm. So the level of flooding we have had now is a 100-year flood. So we are not sure how quickly those rivers will drop. It is truly spectacular to be walking the canyons where there is water flowing. It is a magical experience, and I feel very privileged, and hopefully you will as well, to be able to walk it in these conditions. So with that being said, see you on the trail, and look forward to welcoming you to the base camp before you start. Since we are talking about shoes and changing shoes, I thought it would be good just to add some extras around how to look after your feet on a multi-day hike, and particularly if it's winter where you know you're going to get rain, or in this case where there will be days where you're walking inside of the riverbeds. So number one is make sure you spend time on your feet. Your feet need to toughen up a little before you actually get to the trail. So if you are, which you should be, doing some practice, wear the same shoes that you'll wear on the hike and spend time on your feet. Secondly, make sure you've cut your toenails. Toenails will often push back on a multi-day hike and create painful sections, and sometimes you might even lose your toenails. So make sure your toenails are well trimmed. Thirdly, make sure you have the right size hiking shoe. So whether you're in boots, whether you're in trail shoes, the principle is normally one size larger than you would normally wear. This gives enough space in the front of your toes, in particular on the downhills, so that your toes are not constantly hitting the front of your shoe. Fourth, what really works for me is to wear 2 pairs of socks whenever I do multi-day hikes on each day. So I have a inner sock, which is a thin sock, very fine knit, normally a bamboo or a cotton sock. At the moment, I know for those of you who have access to it, Woolworths has a great bamboo sock that makes a very good inner hiking sock. And then if you want a slightly thicker, warmer one on the outside. And then lastly, something to consider is using an anti-chafing balm or ointment. Now, we use this all the time, and many of the hikers that are on the Leopard Trail and the Canyon Trail use this. It's almost like it almost feels, initially when you apply it, it feels almost like a Vaseline, but it dries onto your foot, creating almost like a second skin, almost like a silicone effect, that then when there is chafing and rubbing, it doesn't create blisters. You can get these at the base camp of the Canyon Trail and the Leopard Trail. We do sell them from the shop there, but highly recommend. You only need to put it on probably once or twice during the duration of the hike. I'd recommend putting it on the night before the hike, and then maybe on day 2 or 3 again, just to give it another section. All right, happy hiking, and hope your feet remain healthy and strong for the whole way.